Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host Magnet, and as you can see on the screen today, today's lesson is going to be about TvP unit compositions and micromanaging them properly. And the three compositions we're going to be taking a look at today are by far the most common in TvP. The first one especially is really dominant, but it's Bio plus support, meaning Ghosts and Vikings, Mech, and finally Hellbat Marauder is the mainstay in your composition. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and jump into the testing map, which you guys can see here. And basically I'm going to simulate battles here. And I'm going to try to control both sides the best I can, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on the Terran side to show you guys how to pick these fights. So first off, we need to start out with the bio composition we were talking about. So we're going to grab some upgrades to kind of make this semi-realistic. And I'm going to make just Marines and Marauders. Mostly Marines. This is going to be a pretty Marine-heavy composition. And the whole idea with this is having the correct support out in order to respond with what your opponent is creating. So, of course, the bio always needs medevacs, so we're going to splash some of those in there as well. And over on the Protoss side, we're going to make sure we get the right upgrades, such as charge, maybe an armor upgrade here or there. And the first composition we're going to be taking a look as far as battling is just a straight-up Zealot Archon composition. This is something you might see every once in a while, at least something that was more popular in Wings of Liberty especially. But the new counters to that are actually Widow Mines, so we're going to throw out a few mines here. And you don't want too many, maybe 5 or 6 is enough. I'll show you guys how to control your army against this composition. This is going to basically be you kind of demanding position against him, and then you kind of baiting him back into your mines. That's exactly what I'm going to do here. So if you just can run the Zealots over the mines especially, then that'll be a really big win for you. So let's just go ahead and attack these. You can see I take the Terran army, I stim them. I'm going to try to run them over the mines as much as possible. You can see if all the Zealots are clumped up like that, they all just kind of instantly disappear. And once you're against Archons, of course, just try to fan out the best you can so you're not taking too much slash from the Archons. And that's a pretty easy killing up. So there's a reason not many people do that anymore. But you still may see people running Storm first. So we're going to simulate that as well. We'll assume this is a little later in the game. Against Storm, they still will be running mostly Zealots in their composition, so you still will want the handful of mines out there, as you can see, but the only tech I've really added are Ghosts, and I've barely added any bio to this composition as well. And this is a really complicated scenario. I'm actually going to have an entirely separate video for Ghost control against Templar, and a separate video for picking the right engagements with this composition against Protoss units in general, because it's just so complicated. It's not really something that's very straightforward. I'm also going to simulate some different upgrades in this battle as well. But what you want to do is you really want to place scans ahead of your army, send your Ghosts in there and try to EMP as much as you can. Then if you can attract his army over the mines, then it'll pretty much just be a cleanup process from here. But the whole thing I'm trying to get on at this point is that if you're facing Templar, especially with a lot of Marines in your composition, you have to be able to land EMPs. So that's the biggest point that I really wanted to show with that section. The micro is pretty straightforward from there. Of course, try to kite away from the Zealots the best you can, stuff like that. So finally, we're going to talk about engaging a Colossus army like this. This can be pretty difficult. As you can see, I've mixed in Vikings to the composition to try and help out. The good number is about 3 to 4 Vikings for every Colossus, depending on the size of the battles. And these armies are fairly realistic, but not terribly. Note that I have a giant spread on my army here, and this is one of the biggest keys to engaging Colossus, is have a huge arc. You can see I'm taking up about 90 degrees worth of an arc on this, and as soon as I attack in, try to have your Vikings hitting the Colossus the best you can, and try to pull little parts of your army across to try and kill the Colossus. As you can see, I pulled off a little bit from the right. Once the Colossus are dead, then there's really no reason not to land your Vikings if you have a lot left over, because if you can take out the rest of his support, or else maybe you can just go home with them or something like that, the Colossus are dead, so there's not much of a reason to have a ton of Vikings sitting around so you don't wind up getting, switched on or something like that. So there's a lot of intricacies to that, and like I said, I'm going to have a separate video for it, for a bunch of those scenarios, but just to kind of give you a good idea. The next we're going to take a look at, as you saw on that screen previously, is Mech, and by that we mean no Marines, no Marauders, sometimes Ghosts to help out, and we'll show you guys how to handle all this. So this will be simulating kind of a really early attack from the Protoss, and he has pretty good upgrades as well, so keep that in mind during this fight. We're going to assume that the Mech is entrenched and the Protoss is trying to attack in with just Zealot Archon and a lot of Zealots, which can be really hard to handle. So again, you can see I have the mines kind of leading out there. There's a decent number of Hellbats, and I've transformed some Hellions to try and bait the army into the mines a little bit. So you can come forward, shoot him a little bit with your Hellions, and try to bait him back into the mine explosions. By that point, his army should be really weakened, and the tanks can do the rest of the work from there. Maybe a little awkward trying to shoot Archons or tanks because they take forever to kill. But even still, little baiting tactics back into your mines and tanks are going to be really good if you're running mech. Now later on in the game, basically everybody who's anybody is going to add Immortals against mech. And that's why I have these ghosts kind of poking around. So what you want to do with these ghosts is you want to get a fair amount. You can see there's 6 Immortals there. I have 4 ghosts in this composition, and the 2 cost the same. The ghosts are actually a little bit cheaper. So there's really no reason not to have a comparable ghost count compared to the Immortal count when you're engaging these kinds of armies. So we'll have the Protoss basically spread out just a tiny little bit and then attack in. But the ghosts, if you just land EMPs, especially on the Immortals, this army will get crushed. So you can just kind of line them up, hit the Immortals like so. You can even EMP the Archons if you feel so inclined. And just look how incredibly fast the composition dies if you're only able to add in ghosts. So that's a really big point of running mech against Immortals, is you really need ghosts. You may also get into weird situations where they're running a pretty heavy Stargate army, so like a decent number of Tempests, some Void Rays, some Zealot Archon maybe left over from previous fights or something like that. If that's the case, look at our composition. It is 100% different than before. Now, as we may know, tanks are going to do nothing against this composition, which means you need to be able to switch yourself into something that's going to make a little more sense. So, I have some Thors, I have a few Ghosts. The Ghosts are always going to be useful, and a lot of Vikings there. And if you can just EMP whatever you need to as far as it's in clumps like this, and if the Thors are splashing in clumps as well, then the first layer of stuff should die really fast. If it's basically only Tempests, or if you need to EMP Templar or something like that, that may change the battles as well. So I'm just trying my best to try and simulate some of these scenarios which I might run into if you're running mech. But you can see, if you have the right composition, if you get EMPs off and get your army fighting in the right places, you should do fine. So lastly, we're going to take a look at Hellbat Marauder, which is an interesting composition you don't see too terribly often, but there are still some pro-level players that do use compositions like that, such as 4GG, that will play really tech-heavy. So you can see I have no Marines in this composition, and instead I'm going to replace those Marines with Hellbats. So Hellbats are starting to come out. And again, we're going to test this against the Storm army that you might see every once in a while, especially against this kind of army as well. The Zealots usually won't do much, and that's the reason you want to have all these Hellbats. It's not nearly as micro-intensive as far as, moving the bio around. But I'm going to also simulate that this composition is really strong at tanking Storms. So toward the middle and the end of this fight, I'm actually going to be eating a couple Storms and show you that this army composition is strong enough just to kind of fight right through it. So we're going to throw some EMPs out, kind of miss them just a little bit. We'll have the Templar throwing out Storm, and of course I'm controlling both sides. But even still, you ate like 2 or 3 Storms, and most of your army's still alive. So you can see the strength of this, especially against that kind of composition. Now we're going to run a composition from Protoss that's a lot of Immortals, and your composition as Terran is really not going to change too much. And we're going to assume that the Protoss is kind of wising up just a little bit, making less Zealots and more Immortals, and they're going to re-engage. Now again, this shouldn't be too hard of a fight if you're running this kind of composition against the Protoss. You really just need to EMP as much as you can, so just drop EMPs wherever you can. Notice I have the Ghosts kind of split off to the side, so they're not trying to fight through the army in order to get their job done. And once the EMPs and everything go down, the Immortals are going to have a hard time dealing with this many Marauders that have stim, so you can just go ahead and target them down one by one. Pretty easily killing it right there. And then finally, the hardest composition to engage, of course, again, is Colossus. Just because it's just hard to balance this out. It's hard to pick the right fights against Colossus, which is why I mentioned that you're going to want to watch the videos that I produce later that are separate for picking the right engagements in this matchup, since it's so complicated. But you can see I have a ton of Marauders. I'm fanning out once again, and my Hellbat count is a lot less because there's no Zealots in here to fight this army, so the Hellbats don't really make a lot of sense. So I'm going to make as many Marauders as possible. And what I'm going to do this time is I have a lot less Vikings. I'm going to try and get the Marauders close up on the Colossus. So if you can get the Marauders on top of the Colossus and just target them down, then all of a sudden this army has basically no punching power left behind it. You can land your Vikings, and you should be able to clean this up fairly easily. Of course, these are kind of oddly shaped fights, and you'll have better results in real life if you get these kinds of situations. But that'll pretty much do a basic overview of unit compositions and how to handle your army in most of these fights. And I hate to allude to it over and over and over, but like I said, A lot of these fights look really simplified in these, and they're a lot harder in real life. So I'm going to be making extra videos to show you how to handle ghosts especially, and how to pick the right fights in TvP. One last thing I should mention is that if you don't know if you should fight or not, just don't pick a fight. Try to pick them apart with medevac drops and stuff like that, and wait until you have the right composition. So hope you guys enjoyed that video. I'll be back with more, of course, very soon. I am almost up to a daily basis on my channel right now, so stay tuned for more. In the meantime, check out our sponsor, which is sc2replaystats.com. They have a really cool site that will analyze your replays and kind of tell you what you could do better in each game. It's a really cool thing. You should check it out. In the meantime, I'll be back soon. Take care.